Okay, great. So Ruby Reyes is a public education advocate, born and raised on a small farm in South Texas. She spent 10 years with the City School, a social justice youth education nonprofit, first as development staff and then as co-executive director. There, she developed an innovative shared leadership model that institutionalized youth leadership and voice in all parts of the organization, from the board to staffing. In November of 2017, Ruby became the director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance, sharing in public education advocacy. And she also serves as the Massachusetts Adult Literacy Hotline Coordinator, connecting adult learners to education resources across the state. Thank you so much for being here, Ruby.
I just want to say I've been on calls all morning, some of them super difficult. So I really appreciate the wonderful like check-in question and just kind of like resetting in this like really positive way that I actually really needed for my day. So thank you for the wonderful check-in question and the wonderful stories, whether you're old or not. So I came up with some best practices. The City School is an organization in Dorchester that serves young people from across different in different leadership capacities around social justice education. And so we had young people on our board for a long time. And so I just want to share, the things that I learned in setting up and rebuilding a board for the City School specifically. And it was a working board. So I feel like it's important to share that. So this is all based on the City School model. And, there's many different types of boards, many different best practices. So our board membership, I like to think of it kind of like as a part-time job is how I would talk to folks. So being clear with folks about their responsibilities. And I think I said this in one of the other presentations, but a board's responsibility is hiring, firing, and evaluating an executive director and being financially sound. So you can be sued as an individual of a board. And so folks need to understand that responsibility. You also need to make sure that you have board insurance so that if you are sued, you're okay. And so those are two kind of like major pieces of work, regardless of what type of board you're on. So you can be a policy board, you can be different types of boards, but these are the two main functions. And the most important thing is being clear about what your board's responsibility is. I would say for new board members, again, just making sure that they understand that those are the two major things. And then other stuff includes they have to make a donation. You have to have 100% board giving, whether it's $1, whether it's $4,000, like everybody has to give. You can determine the amount at the beginning. You don't have to, but I think you really need to make sure that your board members know that they have to give. And that also that it's self-sustaining. So you bring on new board members and usually the other board members are responsible for that. I will tell this quick story because I feel like it's really important. We have young people on our board, or we had young people on our board. And this one young person who was board member, I remember he gave me like $250 like in cash and was like, and give it to me in an envelope. And I was like, what is this? And he was like, it's my check. This is my board contribution. And I was like, oh my God, you can't give me this much money. Like, this is no, I won't take it. And he said, Ruby, you're going to take it because I'm a board member and I'm a giver and this is my responsibility. And you're going to take it because this is my donation. And so I would tell our board members, like, if this child can give his checkup, like that you have a responsibility to give, even if it's $1, because it means that you're committed to this organization financially as well. And, and I always remember that because I didn't want to take, I felt like I was like, I can't take this. And you have to take it. And also everybody has to give regardless of their means. And I think that's really important. So be clear about your structure. So one large board meeting a month, are they regular, where you regularly discuss certain items? You have small committees that share reports, and then you determine a regular schedule. So I think really being clear about like, okay, these are the expectations, right? This is what the ongoing agenda structure is going to look like. You're going to come to this meeting and you can expect at least these 3 things, right? And I think determining the regular meeting schedule is really important too, so that they have it on their monthly calendar, like every 3rd Thursday of the month from 6 to 8, that's when we meet. I know that, like, no questions asked. What type of board? So there's like a working board where like people are taking on, you know, supporting staff roles, whether it's like, oh, I'm good with, you know, data processing, like I can do that part. There's fundraising boards where like they are responsible for raising 25% of an organizational budget. And then there's policy boards. So they are in kind of the nitty gritty of policy, right? So determining what type of board, I think is who then you determine needs to be on that board, right? So if they're a fundraising board and they're expected to raise 25% of your budget, like that's a different group of people than your working board. And so you need to kind of figure out what type of board you want to be. And then always have a board orientation or an interview. So interview new board members, gather their resumes, share important documents with them. Maybe not in the interview, but in the orientation. So I always share like annual budget, annual reports, a financial audit, member contact information. But being clear about your financial situation, I think, is really important. And when you first ask somebody to be on your board and you interview them, I think it's important to bring up major issues in the organization and not be shy about it. So if you're running a budget deficit, they need to know what they're walking in on. If you're planning an ED transition, like you're going to have leadership change in the next year, they need to know that. If you're going to be going to get your 501c3, that's a huge body of work, right? Like they need to be clear about what they're walking into. And the same goes for kind of like, you know, like if you are doing these things, you're going to look for people that have expertise in these like different things. So when we did our ED transition, we had an HR person from Third Sector New England who was on our board, and they like beasted our transition process. But like that's the type of expertise that you're going to be looking at based on the needs of your organization. So provide an estimate of hours and breakdown to people that you want to be on your board. Like these are the clear expectations. You have one board meeting a month, that's 2 hours. You have one subcommittee meeting, that's 2 hours. You have like meetings, you're gonna be expected to respond to emails. You're gonna be expected to read emails. So that's like another hour to 2 hours. So this is what we're saying, like 5 to 6 hours a month, right? That doesn't sound crazy. And then your annual board retreat, if you have 2 per year, that's 8 to 16 hours. If you want to throw in like, okay, this orientation, we have a retreat and we have an orientation, like you need to be clear with folks of what the expectations are in terms of time. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. I'm just gonna stop for questions. Oh, okay. We'll do questions afterwards. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
You're all good.
Pick people based on the needs of your org. So again, identifying what you're going to need. So if you need a lawyer, if you need a finance person, if you need a programming person, like you're, you know, in the process of redeveloping your programming this coming year, right? So you want somebody that has that expertise. So you really need to think about what the needs of your org are, make that list, and then pick people based on that list. And I would say pick good people who are responsible, not people with good politics. So a lot of times, like our friends that were like, oh yeah, they're like always talking about anti-capitalism. They're awesome. Like they're not always the best people for your board because they don't show up. They're flaky. Like, you know, they don't read things that you know, like they just don't show up. So you really need to pick somebody who's going to show up when they say they're going to show up, going to follow through when they say they're going to follow through on like different issues, because the reality is that you want a board. I think the easiest kind of decay of a board is when people just aren't engaged at all, and then they just kind of like disappear. And that begins the decay of that board structure. So making sure that you're really holding folks to picking people that are really responsible. Let me see. And team building is vital for your board. So take care of your board. Be clear again about the expectations. Make sure tensions are addressed. If there was an incident at a board meeting, you have to talk about it. You can't be like, oh, everything's great. Provide additional training, like learning how to read financial statements, I think is really important. We had young people on our board, and not like, they would be like, oh, we're having this training on how to read financial statements. For our youth board members. And I was like, actually, all of our adult board members don't know how to read financial statements. And so I think really making sure that like that type of training happens. And you can make it like across your organization. Like if your staff doesn't know how to read financial statements, like you can make it like an organizational training. And I'm keep using financial statements, but you can do, stuff that you need. For youth board members, make sure that they can vote. Like don't set up, youth board members to come into a board and then have this like weird policy where you're like, oh my God, and now they can't vote because they're under 18 and blah, blah, blah. And so you really need to make sure that you have that, that policy and stuff researched. You need to provide support where it's needed, and don't treat them completely different because they are young people. But also just be understanding, because the reality is that most, like us as adults, we live on email. Like if we don't respond to an email in 5 seconds, everybody's like, what's going on? They don't live that way. So just being realistic about the best way to communicate with young people as well as other folks on your board. And then usual board tensions is that there's usually a separation and a disconnect between what staff are doing and what the board is doing. And so usually the staff will blame the board or the board will blame the staff. And like, that's pretty usual. A lot of EDs try to separate the two. And there are places where they can come together, because I think it's dangerous when a board member is like involved in day-to-day stuff. But at the same time, I think there does need to be some type of place where they can come together and not just like interact, but like have conversations and be all committed to this organization. And then have fundraising expectations. What are they expected to raise and how? So if you have like an annual fundraiser, you can say to them, you're expected to give your individual donation, and you're expected to help raise, $500 for our annual fundraiser. And we have packets that you can use to help fundraise. Or you're expected to raise $500, which can also be like silent auction items, right? So you're creating the structure that you expect for them to carry out on the work, right? And it's not just, and that's where like you can have staff and board come together in these different ways, is by creating, the same way that you wouldn't expect your like lead organizer to suddenly know how to ask for donations, is the same way that you can't necessarily expect your board member to do that, right? But you can have like a fundraising packet where you say like, let's try doing it. Let's go to ULA's and see if they're willing to give us a gift card. Let's make the ask, and I think that that's a good way to kind of bring those two groups together, but also create expectations from the beginning. Like, this is what you're expected to raise, and you can do it. We're going to guide you. We're going to give you the tools. And then also like, just know that they have to give money. Like a lot of board members, I think, they're like, oh, I volunteer my time. Like, what do you mean? I like give 5 to 6 hours per month. What are you talking about? And it's like, yes, you do give 5 to 6 hours a month, and we really appreciate your time, but you also have to make your annual donation. And you know, and you have to do that. Everybody does that. Like you do an individual donor request around Christmas time, right? So like they, you know, Giving Tuesday, I think it's called. You know, like those are expectations that everybody has. And I think the more you normalize it, the better your life will be later on, because then it won't be awkward and they'll know from the beginning, like they have to be invested in all ways, in their time, in their treasure, in a variety of different ways. And they're also your cheerleader, right? So they don't get to talk smack about you outside of this organization. Like they can talk to their partner, they can talk to, you know, their mom, but they cannot talk to other people. Like if there's stuff going on, that's part of the expectation, is that you're the biggest cheerleader. Like you're like, these people, amazing work. Like, dang, they just solved racism. Like that's why you need to give them money. And that's it. That's my presentation. So
beautiful. Brava. Thank you so much, Ruby. That was like jam-packed with so much information. And so I would love to talk a little bit about it. Yes, Nia says solved racism. Good job.
Boom, right. Done. That's what you
moving on. So we have a few minutes. We have 10 minutes for questions. Although what we could do is, you know, just get out some burning questions for Ruby now, move on and talk with Imari, and then have a longer time for questions at the end. Let's see how it goes. Okay, Nia asks, can you say more about what a policy board is? And you're on mute.
A policy board is more like, if you're, for a lot of like researching type organizations, just like setting these organizational standards of like the work. And so you can have a policy board that says, you know, like this type of policy is how we like frame, you know, like, I don't know, Union of Concerned Scientists, for example. Like this is how we're framing our, you know, like our work in this anti-racism lens, or, you know, whatever. And, you know, like the expectations of that, they're more nitty gritty, supposedly. I don't know. I've never actually been on a policy board. I've always been on working boards. And then I've never actually seen a fundraising board. So I don't know what it's like for an org. I've always been in tiny little grassroots groups that have zero money. So yeah.
I have a question. So first of all, thank you for this presentation. I think it's super clear, down to earth. It's great for new board members. Can you say, can you give some more examples about how you are a self-sustaining board, what your process is for bringing on new board members?
Sure. So usually with board subcommittees, you have different subcommittees, usually have like a finance, a governance. So you have one or two or three people, or if depending on the size of your board, that are solely responsible for ensuring that you're self-generating. So they're the ones that are like identifying people to bring onto the board. They're the ones meeting with potential new board members and saying, let's have a coffee, let's talk about this organization. Is this something you would be interested in? Is this something you have the time for? You know, if it is, like, these are the next steps. Like it would mean, you know, the executive director would meet with you, or you'd come to a board meeting and check it out. Whatever the new steps are, they're the ones that determine kind of those new steps as well. And then they also are responsible for managing the board in terms of not like overall management, but saying like, if there are tensions, like how are we dealing with this? Is this subcommittee like up and running? If people are not coming to board meetings, somebody from your governance should be like, what's good? You weren't able to make it the past 2 meetings. Are you okay? Is everything all right? You know, what's going on? So really just making sure that the maintenance of the board being self-sustaining is happening through that subcommittee.
And could you talk about how boards you've been a part of elect new members?
Sure. So usually, well, the way that we did it at the city school was the governance committee would have an ongoing list of people that they were targeting to join the board for different reasons. And so based on the needs that we put together as like a full board, like these are the things that we need for this organization. We would look for people that had those levels of expertise. And so we had like an ongoing list based on needs. And so people would submit names at the time when it was the timeline appropriate to it. So usually we would bring new board members on in the fall. And so if we brought new board members on in the fall, we had our annual retreat, usually in September, October. So we would do board orientation, usually in August or September. So we had to have people in before then. So throughout the year, we would be identifying people and saying like, oh, this person's really good. They would be brought up to governance, and then somebody would meet with them for an hour and see kind of where they were at, kind of like doing like a mini interview. Like, what are your interests? Why, like, would you be interested in joining this board? What do you bring? But also like, is this, are you even in alignment, with the values of this organization? Because clearly like the city school wasn't going to bring on some right-wing psychopath, but like meeting with them and getting a feel for them and seeing if you're interested and if they're interested. And then from there, you would move forward and say, like, would you be interested in meeting with our executive director? Would you be interested in coming to a board meeting to observe and like be a part and see? That's kind of what we did. Johnny, you have your hand up.
Yes, just let me put my hand down here. Hi, Ruby. Thanks for the presentation. It's a lot of insight. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the 100% giving from board members. Just slightly because there's so the department that agrees, but there's another department that's like, can we also redefine what giving is? Can we extend that? And would you agree that giving can also be strategically supporting a side committee and really attracting new donations and investment to the organization? Does it have to be monetary giving? I guess that's the lingering question.
For me, it has to be both. So like I said, you can give $1, that's you giving, but you have to do both. I feel like that's important. It's important to say to funders, 100% of our board is a giving board. And again, like, like devil's in the details. They don't need to know that like a young person gave me $5, but they need to know that 100% of my board is giving.
Thank you.
Cool. So if other people have more questions, which, I'm sure we do. But I think let's move on to hear from Imari, and then we'll have more time for questions for both Imari and Ruby before the end of our meeting today. Thank you so much, Ruby.
Cool. So just to introduce Imari, I could read his bio, but I'll just share sort of why I thought he'd be a really great sort of insight, support, expert on this work. When I was in social work school, I was interested in like interested in like a development like as a career, and really becoming like this like Black fundraising person. And my professor Tiziana Deering outlined like a few just like Black fundraisers in the Boston area that like had sort of really defined this work and made it a career. And I remember Imari was one of the 5 folks that she'd known, probably one of 2 men who were like in this work. And I didn't meet Imari yet, but I was like, oh, I should connect with him at some point. And then Imari was the ED of Parenting Journey, and my homie works there. And I eventually met Imari through that work. And Imari had a long career just doing development work, I guess at Italian House, and then Parenting Journey, and is now at King Boston as their executive director. And I guess I just thought that as we're building out this work, as we're thinking about governance and board development, it'll be really insightful to have the experience of someone who's interacted, who's a Black person who's interacted with a board, who's led organizations and has to sort of navigate the racial tensions that exist in that experience, and who can offer sort of what has worked and what is useful and what is maybe not useful in that sort of experience. And so, yeah, super excited to hear your thoughts, Imari, and yeah, just grateful that you came.
I appreciate getting the invite and getting to know some of you even better, and having some of my, I was going to say old friends, but then we've kind of been on this, what it means to be old. Some of my longtime friends on here too, like someone who has a yellow flower as a picture, for example, who I think we might be the same age. But I really, and I really appreciate Ruby's presentation, because I think she did a far better job than I would have, framing how boards operate. And I think the model in City School is a great model that I think, independently of where you go, one should think through some of those steps that she's outlined. It's probably like a great framework for us to take with us. And so the way that I look at boards as BIPOC leaders, as an extension of some of the work that Ruby mentioned. And so when you're running an organization, there are some very pragmatic things that boards need to do. And then as leaders, BIPOC leaders, women, et cetera, things that board involvement and board engagement are important. So I felt I wanted to outline a few of them and then just really engage in a conversation. And so I've had an opportunity to sit on at least 10 boards, almost all of them entirely nonprofit boards. And so I've kind of clustered some of the boards that I've sat on. I've sat on education-based organization boards, and so a board of a charter school, the Edward Brooke board, and I'm currently on the board of the UMass system, so that's all 5 of the colleges. I've sat on 2 environmental organization boards, Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, and Appalachian Mountain Club. I've sat on 2 organizations that are settlement houses, and so the United South End Settlement Houses is the board that I'm currently on, as well as the Elizabeth Peabody House in Somerville. And then I've sat on 2 federation boards, the Providers Council, which was a board which is a trade organization of about 350 large child welfare organizations, and then the African American Federation, which is an organization that doesn't exist anymore, but it was made up of organizations led by Black folks. I think back maybe 20 years ago. And so each of those board experiences, I think, did 2 things for me. When I thought about my own trajectory doing this work in the helping profession, both as an organizer or as a nonprofit leader, I thought that my board participation brought a level of professional development. And so it has been part of my professional development strategy, it really coming up through this sector. And so if you are, wherever you sit in an organization, if you're thinking about running an organization or moving around in an organization or doing different jobs in an organization, board participation, board involvement is a great way to get some tools in your toolbox. And so if you don't know how to read financials and you join a board, joining the finance committee is a great way for you to understand financials, because you'll be on that. You won't be the only one sole responsible for the finances. And so you'll have an opportunity to really be alongside of financial professionals to understand reading financials and creating financial statements and reading an audit. And so that's really where I learned, or one of the places I learned how to read financials is through my board participation, because I did not know how to read financials up until, having somebody, when I was younger, having someone walk me through all these things, including reading an audit. understanding a 990, all the things that are important regardless of where you sit in an organization. You know, you want to be able to understand how the place works. Or if you are engaged in development and you want to understand how folks are looking at logic models and organizational outcomes and community outcomes, joining the program committee. So, you know, boards are usually made up of 4 or 5 standing committees, a governance committee. Ruby mentioned a governance committee as far as thinking about board policies and board recruitment. The executive committee, which is made up of the officers, usually a program committee, usually a finance and audit committee. And so those are some of the staples of most boards. And I think when you decide that you want to be on a board or volunteer on a board, because you could also join committees without actually being on the board as well. Most nonprofits allow you to sit on committees without being on the board. It's just a great way to get tools in your professional toolbox. The other reason, the second reason, is experience in subject matter expertise. I mentioned education, environment, communications, and this federation style of boards that I've been on. I think part of, you know, being a Black man, and I'm sure this is applicable to other folks from other BIPOC communities, is that I think we inherently understand that all these things are interconnected, right? And so if a young person is not in school because they have asthma and the parents don't have housing that is affordable, like housing, education, and asthma and health disparities, I mean, it's all interconnected. And I think nonprofits have a way of perpetuating racism by segmenting how people actually live their lives. No one lives their lives in an out of school time bucket, or in an environmental bucket independent of where they live, or in a housing bucket independent of how they're going to feed themselves. And so understanding the interrelationship between different subject matters, and I'm not saying it's going to make you an expert, but understanding that relationship and understanding how these organizations work, it to me felt like an important part of my own professional development, and really thinking about this work from a social determinants of health perspective, a city planner perspective. You know, I understand transportation is related to housing, is related to food insecurity, is related to jobs, right? And so part of my own understanding is by trying to be a part of boards to develop content expertise. You know, AMC, I was probably 1 or 2 brown people on that board, but I learned more about environmental policy, conservation policy, and how people who think about the outdoors think in that 6 years on the board than I ever would have, you know, on my own. I'm not a outdoors type of guy. You know, I don't like my sneakers getting scuffed. So like, I don't be running around the dirt that much. And so like, going out on these hikes with these folks and being a part of this organization actually opened a perspective that I didn't have. I mean, I like going to an arboretum, but I usually don't drive 5 hours to the White Mountains and try to hike a mountain. That's just kind of not me. And so I did learn a lot. And so that was an important part of my learning and my education, in both in how people think and about the outdoors and the environment. So that was an important piece. And I think the last piece, and probably the most important, because otherwise I think Ruby mentioned this, you're just not going to show up, and people don't show up. If there's no mission fulfillment in your engagement in a board, you're probably not going to show up. And so a lot of people join boards because somebody else is on that board, or they think that's the cool board, but they don't give a shit about the content or the mission fulfillment, like what it means for themselves or folks who are involved in the organization. And then they don't show up and you're chasing them. So mission fulfillment is probably, I should have started there, but it is an important part of how you engage in the board. It can't be the only part, right? Because you don't want your learning to be in an echo chamber where you're you work in out of school time, you're on out of school time boards, you volunteer in out of school time, right? So it also needs to be a part of your own professional development. And so those are the 3 ways that I've looked at board engagement, is through personal professional development of leaders, diversity of experience, and then mission fulfillment. And so that's when I'm thinking about board and board involvement, that's how I've framed it. And so if you are now running an organization, and I think Ruby gave a lot of details, there's these three buckets I think about when you're involved in an organization, and I say political, rational, and experience, right? And so when you join an organization, and I'm not gonna lie, this is we family, so I'm gonna tell you the truth. I didn't understand the political as well as I should have, and it cost me a lot. Some of these organizations, that they are trying to think of themselves as the nouveau anti-racist, nouveau diversity organizations, will hire brown people or women, but they don't really want to change. They just really want you to be a figurehead. And so, not understanding that completely, you will get your ass whooped, thinking that you're there to do something, and only to realize that it is more political than need be. And so, I think when you get these jobs, you even if you think that everything that you think is the way that you wanted it, and you like everybody during the interview, all the board members high-fiving you and saying do what you want to do, understand, trust, and believe it's political. And so you have to take that in consideration when you enter a board as a new leader, or you will pay both in your psychic energy, or they're gonna throw your butt out of there, which I also have that experience too. I've both got my psychic energy used up, and I got my butt thrown out of there because I was not minding the political. I think the second piece is the rational. A lot of times people who are very smart in their day jobs join boards, and they lose their damn minds. They start navigating decisions around community, or even the enterprise of the board, in irrational ways. Some board members take to heart, in a way that's super irrational, the work of the organization, and make decisions based upon that. And so that is one thing that I think you also have to take into consideration when you are managing a board, is sometimes very smart people will make irrational decisions on a board level, and those irrational decisions will become personal to people. And so always being mindful of the rational, irrational in board decisions, both in two fronts, right? Just because someone has a lot of intellect in the private sector as a hedge fund manager does not mean that they're an expert over you in our work. And so there's an assumption that that's the case, and sometimes they have more weight. And so again, these irrational decisions based on wealth expertise trumping authentic expertise or experience expertise, I think flies in the lane of rational and irrational. And so when you're managing board, that's the second piece. And then the last piece I would say is experiences. And so, you are also as a leader of an organization, stewarding experiences of folks who are volunteering. And I think sometimes we get caught up in our day-to-day interaction with the work, and we don't realize that the people who are on our board don't get the small interactions. And so it is a job to be a steward of experiences for folks who are on the board. And I was at another meeting again, I guess you guys are recording me, so maybe we're not that family, so I won't say too much. But I was in a conversation about some individuals who run pretty large organizations that have fallen asleep at the wheel, and as a result of falling asleep at the wheel, their board they've lost control of their board, and so their board is now leading and calling shots in ways that boards normally shouldn't do, because the person had gotten senior and comfortable in the prestige of their position. And so mining experiences, both for engagement purposes and for purposes of your boards not getting in front of you, not having you in front of your skis, is an important part of the job. Is always being mindful. A lot of time, unfortunately, will be spent stewarding board members if you are leading an organization, fortunately or unfortunately. And so depending on how you do it or structure that, that's the other piece I would be paying attention to. And so I think, that's, I'm going to stop there. I thought I wanted to lend this complementary perspective to Ruby's perspective, because I think she gave an excellent overview on pragmatically what you should do. And I think everything that she said is absolutely right. And I think these are some of the, if Ruby gave you the bones, I think these are the ligaments to the connectivity of the work.
Great, thank you so much, Imari. I think those are a lot of really good points that let's spend a few minutes talking about now, and that I think we'll definitely let sit in and marinate a little bit more, and certainly reincorporate as we're continuing to talk about how we design this board.
I just want to add something I totally should have mentioned, is that you should also have board terms. So at the city school, we had 3-year terms. You could only be on the board forever in your lifetime, 6 years total. So that way you have like a changing of leadership, and you don't have people that are on there for their lives. And then the other thing I really wanted to mention is that, there was a moment in our leadership where we didn't have direction. Like, we didn't really feel like our board wasn't coming to meetings, or, we just kind of were at this like impasse. And so the board meeting that we had, where we were like, we don't know what we're doing. We need guidance as your leadership. And like, this board isn't working. You guys aren't coming. We don't know what to do, was like a wake up call for everyone, where they were like, oh snap. And they like got it together. And from there is where we reset and built our board structure based on like these very specific things. So I don't want you to think like we had our stuff together by any means. Like, we definitely had that moment of like, what are we doing? And I think that's really important to kind of know that, it wasn't all peach keen.
Great, thank you, Ruby. From Lisa says, really appreciate the nuance of the relationship between board and ED and the politics of leading. And also there's lots of appreciations in the chat. Johnny asks, maybe for Ruby or Imari, any insight on board bylaws?
I think they're really important around specifically how decisions are made. So like, what is your voting system? Are you doing consensus, but like 2/3 agreement? What does it mean if there's a tie? What does it mean if somebody's absent? That type of stuff I think is really important, because if you're going to pass something like the budget, and there's like questionable, line items or whatever, you need to be able to solidly say like, this is our voting system, this is our decision making, and that goes in the bylaws.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think when you come on to an organization, let's say right now the Boys and Girls Club CEO position is open, like it's a high profile position. You're gonna enter that board that's a well established, one might argue a blue chip organization in town, with bylaws that are already in place, with committees that are already established, with folks, be it 3 to 5 years that are already there, that's been there longer. I mean, you're going to be the newest person in the room, and so I think in some cases where you take over new organizations, that's where you'll have to use your other skills, right? You have to use your political, your rational, and your experience skills, right? And so like, this is this other part of the work that's important to navigate the politics of surviving while being a BIPOC leader in an organization. In some cases, you'll have an opportunity to have incredible influence on organizations, and sometimes you won't. But you understand the importance of the institution. If you're able to make a pivot in the organization. I remember when Lisa took over City Life, there was some work that she needed to do around, one, I think, establishing a sense of tenure at the organization to make the type of changes and considering the political, you are not, regardless of even, you know, your reputation or not, you're rarely going to be able to go to an organization, even with a named reputation, and be able to pivot some things that need to be changed immediately. And so it is incredibly nuanced in how you pace yourself through sometimes things not being updated in the way that you need them to be.
Great. Anybody have any other questions? I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation. We have one more minute.
I have a
Joss.
quick question for Ruby. You mentioned that it's important when you have a youth board to make sure that they feel as if they're able to participate, or that they actually are able to participate at the same level of regular board members. But I'm curious about what distinctions do exist between, or structurally, or at least in your experience, between how youth members show up to the board experience.
So with our youth board members, they had 1-year terms. So they could be on the board for 1 year, but up to 6 years. So we had folks that were on and then they would leave, or they would like graduate and become adults, and then they would come back as like young people. I mean, as like adults. And so either way, like you had 6-year lifetime on the city school board. And over the spans of 6 years, you could do the 1-year terms with young people. I think it was hard sometimes because of the scheduling. And so, we had to be empathetic to the fact that they had like homework and stuff like that. But at the same time, we were also like, look, this is your responsibility. Like, you have to show up to these meetings. You have to like, be part of a subcommittee. You have to have these documents read, like, end of story. Like, you're a board member with all full-fledged voting rights, so you have to do the work like everyone else. And I think that's part of why like our structure was so important to be upfront about it. Like, you're gonna have to read emails, you're gonna have to like vote on emails sometimes, and I can flag it for you. I'll text you, like I'll do that work and let you know like when you have to read an email and respond, but like you need to do the work. And I think but it's a general conversation you have to have with all board members, because just as easily as our young people would like kind of get lazy, like our older folks would get lazy too. And I'd be like, look, you haven't come to like the last 2 meetings, like what's going on? And granted, people are going through things, and it's not like a conversation like, what are you doing? It's more like, is everything okay? Like, what's going on? And I think that's really important for like, somebody in your staff to also, be involved. Like, your ED has to be on some of these committees. Like, I was on the governance committee and I had some of those conversations. Other board members had some of those conversations, but like those conversations have to be had. I was usually the one that met with the young people, and I was like, what's good? Show up. But I do think the term stuff is really important too.
And maybe the only thing that I would add to that, and maybe Ruby said it as well, if you're thinking about engaging young people on your board, there needs to be more than 2. I think when you're on a board and like as a grown up, full-fledged grown up, and you're the only brown person or the only woman or the only anything on the board, like it's never an empowering situation when people are talking about, well, let's go over the balance statement and look at the general ledger on page 52. I mean, you're sitting there like, what the fuck is going on? And imagine if you're 15 years old and so like here again, the experience is important. This is going to be part of your job. And so you're going to have to steward the experience to the people who are on your board. And you have to create a culture on your board that is conducive to both their learning and their participation. And being the lone, the solo soldier on a board as a young person or a woman or a brown person is not a good look, particularly if your fellow lone soldier is not there for the day. Then you're really stuck on an island by yourself. And so I think if you're going to engage young people, it is best that you try to at least get 3 folks and that you provide requisite support to them. One of the things that I did before any board meeting is had 15-minute meetings with every single board member before every single board meeting. There should be no lack of conversation with board members. Like, they should not be hearing, even if you mailed them the packet, even if you mailed them and emailed the packet, you need to spend the requisite time talking to people about the packet or what you're going to discuss on their own before you meet with them. And so, to answer the question, when you're thinking about an elected board, there's got to be, I would recommend a mix between elected board members and appointed board members, so that so that this idea, and Ruby mentioned it in the governance piece, of self-replication, this whole process of board members nurturing themselves, that is not entirely your job or your leadership team's job to do. That you have a lot of support through your governance committee to do that. And if and then you'll want to graduate the schedules and have at least 3 classes. And so you don't want everyone to term out at the same time. And so you want to figure out class 1, class 2, class 3, and you won't want to figure out if someone in class 2 leaves, if you're replacing that position, will I only fulfill 2 years of this person's slot, so that means I still have 4 years of eligibility, versus, now I'm in a hybrid class of my own. And so I think that's something to think about when you're talking about classes and having people fulfill each other's terms. Or if I fulfill someone's term, it actually doesn't count as my term, so that I could have my own 6 years and fulfill someone else's years. And so I guess that would be my advice on both the young people and the question of young people.
Yeah, and the mix of kind of seniority and appointments versus elections. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. I think that makes a lot of sense. And also, Charles has been taking great notes this entire time. This is recorded. Ruby had to jump off. It is 4:06. Thank you so much, Imari, for coming and sharing with us. We have meetings scheduled for the next few months, although we have next time with Reverend Mariama, and no, is that not true? No, next time with Corey. Yes, okay.
From Rapid 7. Yeah, and I sent you all the calendar invite, so you guys got it, and I hope you guys can come. That's gonna be a really cool one. So love to see you out there.
So see you there.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Imari.
See you soon.
Should we just stay here?
Yes.
Unfortunately, I forgot to mention, I have to go. So Northeastern just gave us funding to start a restorative justice center, or like tentatively. So I'm pulling together with some other people at committee to do that. And I am a little late to that meeting, but this is great.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Love to hear more about it.
Of course. I'll talk to y'all soon.
Great, bye.
Bye.
Stop. If I click stop recording, that'll be fine, right?
Yeah, good call. Should I do that?